So the title of this talk is light speed not constant in special relativity. It has been misrepresented that light speed is constant in special relativity. It has been fairly well known that Einstein tells us that according to special relativity, light speed is constant. But when we go back to his 1905 paper on special relativity, he isn't saying that, and in fact light speed is variable. There have been various things obscuring this and giving us a false representation of special relativity. So I'm now going to give a different version of relativity what is usually talked about, and this talk is collecting together things from my other talks. If we think of the existing understanding of special relativity, then this correct representation of special relativity is a revisionism, or moving the goalposts. But goalposts have already been moved a lot in relativity anyway, as I've pointed out in other videos. And if you look at this picture, here they are, these people moving the goalposts in a game. So the existing theory of special relativity, if we move the goalpost, it becomes a different theory of special relativity. And I have a little picture here of Buzz Lightyear explaining to Woody, I moved the goalposts all the way back there. So it's completely different looking. So I think it's hard to digest that we're not even talking about the same theory after the goalposts are moved. And moving the goalposts is usually thought of as a logical fallacy. It's demanding from an opponent that he or she should suggest more and more points after the initial counter argument has been satisfied, refusing to concede or accept the opponent's argument. But as I've said, the way special relativity is dealt with by the education establishment and by physicists, the goalposts keep moving anyway. So we're in this situation that it's a radical moving the goalposts to put things back to what was really being talked about in 1905 by Einstein. So this is the relevant paper on the electrodynamics of moving bodies by Einstein June the 30th, 1905. It showed there on the left hand side the first few sentences. It is known that maximized electrodynamics, as usually understood at the present time when applied to moving bodies, leads to asymmetries, blah 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 blah. Now what I'm saying on the right hand side is the usual translations paper from German into English has been mistranslated. So Einstein was writing in German and it got translated into English and it's wrong. The English translation has been reprinted numerous times without correction. So the paper has been mistranslated into English, but nobody's ever gone ahead and corrected that mistranslation. Historians want science papers uncorrected in reprinting. They want things kept to the original, hence why it is uncorrected. And this is what I found out when I've tried to protest to people. Why is this English translation of Einstein's paper still being printed with all the mistakes in it and not being corrected? And the historians have their input into science and they don't want science papers or to be corrected. They want the original version. It would take a lot of work to correct the mistakes in the mistranslated paper, but the historians want the original version. Hence, it keeps getting reprinted with all the mistakes in it. Of course, historians are not the only readers of science papers, and non-historians would naively think any mistakes would be corrected, but they haven't been. So many people looking at foundations of relativity go to Einstein's paper unaware its mistakes have not been corrected. It is a mistranslated version of Einstein's paper, which they're going to. And I am not unique in finding it was mistranslated. There's this person, Arthur Miller, who also noted it in his book in 1981. I think what happens is there was a massive literature on relativity and issues like this get overlooked, i.e. the issue that Einstein's paper is mistranslated gets overlooked by most people reading about relativity because there's too many other things to divert your attention to. And so here, in the usual translation, it says something like this, where Einstein is saying, in agreement with experience, we further assume the quantity, and he's got that equation, to be a universal constant, the velocity of light in empty space. The word I've highlighted here is velocity, and the German word can translate into English as either velocity or speed, and the translator has chosen the word velocity. But I think it's better served to have most of the time that word translated into speed and not velocity. This is an example of one of the problems in trying to translate Einstein from German into English. You might not be aware that words in the German don't necessarily translate properly into just the one English word. And this is the person, Kregler, in his translation of the 1905 paper of Einstein. Most of the time he uses the word speed and not velocity for his translation from the German into English. So in the usual translation on the left hand side, Einstein says, in agreement with experience, we further assume the quantity, that equation, to be of universal constant, the speed of light in empty space. And I've now changed the word velocity to the word speed because I think it's more appropriate to use the word speed. And in the case of Kregler, he gives the last part is a universal constant, the two-way speed of light in empty space. So what he's got in square brackets, the two-way, that is not in the German. It's his interpretation of reading Einstein in the German and deciding that in the English it makes better sense to say what being talked about is the two-way speed of light, even though Einstein does not use the words two-way. So Einstein, better translated, is shown here on the left hand side, and it's to be a universal constant, the two-way speed of light in empty space. So he's not talking about light speed being constant, he's talking about two-way light speed being constant in this translation. And it's being inferred that it's two-way light speed because what we're talking about is light going from point A to point B and then back to point A. The distance being denoted by AB and is travelled twice by the light, hence it's written down as 2AB. There is a clock at point A and the light leaves at time t subscript A and returns at the time t prime subscript A. So what is being talked about in this equation that Einstein gives is the two-way light speed. It's not the one-way light speed. When we talk about light speed, we normally think of the one-way light speed. But no, Einstein is not talking about one-way light speed, he's talking about the two-way light speed. Going over it again, hence this equation refers to a total distance travelled divided by time taken, and time taken is t, and it equals speed c. But speed is two-way. It's like travelling distance AB and then travelling back again. If it were one-way light speed, then it would travel the distance only once. And it turns out the one-way light speed is variable. What we commonly refer to light speed is the one-way light speed, and that is variable. It is the two-way light speed that is a constant. The significance of this is when people think of light speed, what they are usually thinking about is one-way light speed. And thinking of one-way light speed as a constant is an error. Einstein's paper does not have one-way light speed as constant. Hence the title of this talk, Light Speed Not Constant in Special Relativity, but really means one-way light speed not constant in special relativity. And that's the revision going on, moving the goalposts. Many relativists are even now seen to be saying what I have mentioned about relativity and light speed. There are more people talking about one-way light speed and two-way light speed. It means a revision to what Einstein was talking about in 1905, because Einstein does not use the terms one-way light speed and two-way light speed. So you are looking at Einstein's paper now and putting a different interpretation onto things using words that Einstein did not use. And it's being emphasized here that talking about one-way light speed versus two-way light speed is not mentioned in Einstein's special relativity of 1905. It is an amendment that has come later, an interpretation what he must have meant. As per Einstein's section 3 of his 1905 paper on special relativity, he says, but the ray moves relatively to the initial point of k when measured in the stationary system with the velocity c minus v. So that ... and the word velocity might be better said to be replaced by speed, but anyway, this is for section 5 where he does the relativistic velocity addition. So he's not treating c added to minus v as relativistic velocity addition in the section 3. Thus he has a velocity or speed c minus v less than c for v greater than 0, i.e. light travels with the velocity or speed as c minus v, which does not equal to c. So light speed is variable. And that's what we commonly think of as light speed, as this one-way light speed. There's no light speed constancy in special relativity, if mean by that light travels with speed as c for one way. Thus those who think it that way have misunderstood it. So the second postulate of Einstein is sometimes stated as the principle of light velocity constancy or light speed constancy. Calling it velocity would indicate direction and speed of light is unchanged, so suggesting it's talking about one-way light speed. But more accurately should have stated as principle of two-way light speed constancy. When light goes in one direction and then reflects back to retrace its journey, i.e. direction is not constant. The revised special relativity theory completely destroys most of the things said about relativity in the unrevised special relativity theory. And further, as one looks into Einstein's papers, find them full of mistakes, as noted by such people as this. This is in a science magazine, and Johann is pointing out that Einstein made lots of maths mistakes. So the issue becomes such things as, why didn't Einstein become more aware that his theory had been mistranslated into English? And I think the reason is possibly that his wife was a major contributor to the theory. She would have been more concerned about the mistranslation, as it might not have been in agreement with her understanding of relativity. Whereas for Einstein, for his understanding relativity, the mistranslation did not seem to make much difference to him. And this is the lady dealing with Einstein's wife and suggesting the idea that Einstein's wife was a major contributor to the theory of Einstein. So now in relativity we have this problem of the meaning of words being messed up, where you have a signifier and it points to the signified, i.e. if you have a word and then it points to the concept that the word means. Because now in the revision, if you talk about the principal constant light speed, that does not mean light speed is constant, etc. It means two-way light speed, not the one-way light speed. Anyway, putting that issue aside, Einstein was working from a tradition of unified physics theory. Victorians had a unified theory, which sometimes got called vortex theory. And this is the historian who dealt with that issue of the vortex theory. The paper is the vortex atom, a Victorian theory of everything. The Victorian unified theory is being ignored by physicists because they think Einstein has changed things, but Einstein is making mistakes, and so correcting those mistakes, we are back to the ignored unified theory. So this is what Craig says: it's the vortex atom was a foundational theory of physics, and as such it was difficult to subject to experimental tests. As we've seen throughout its lifetime, it was faced with serious difficulties of both an empirical and a conceptual nature, yet in the eyes of vortex advocates, none of these amounted to a definite refutation. Although the theory was abandoned, it was not really refuted and certainly never falsified. It goes on to say, to put it in a nutshell, the vortex atom theory was so rich and flexible and so undetermined that it was practically beyond falsification. Of course, for the very same reason, it was also unverifiable. The mathematical richness of the vortex theory might be considered a blessing, but it was a curse as well. And that's the problem of the theory. You can't falsify it. You just keep working on it, trying to make it work. If you have a problem with fitting the theory to experiments and so forth, then that just means you need further work on the theory. But the same thing happens with modern unified theory attempts such as superstring theory. Superstring theory seems to be unfalsifiable. There doesn't seem to be an experiment put forward where you can actually test the theory and decide whether it's should be falsified. Instead, the theory just keeps being worked upon. So this is a group of Einstein's friends, and before he became famous they were studying physics, and one of the books they were looking at was Carl Pearson's The Grammar of Science. And this is a picture of Carl Pearson, and my historian Clark supports him. In Pearson's modified theory of 1891, he sought to combine the merits of the extended vortex atom and the Boscovian point atom. This he did by reducing the atomic sphere to a point from which ether continually flows in all directions of space, or what he called an ether squirt. He later described in his point atom as something like a tap turned on underwater, except the machinery of the tap is dispensed with in the case of the squirt. And really I prefer to use the term point particle rather than the term point atom, but that's what they were talking about it as, the point atom. So we have the link to Boscovich. From Pearson, he was working on Boscovich's theory, and Einstein was reading Pearson's book, which was dealing with Boscovich. And this is my friend Draguslov. He's written a book about explaining how Boscovich is the founder of modern science, and in the sense that Einstein was working from Boscovich's theory, yes, modern science is coming from this direction. So have a unified field theory, aka which means also known as theory of everything tradition that Einstein was working from, and this gets omitted from being mentioned to physics students. What is taught to physics students is mainly concentrated on what Einstein did and what others did after him, and ignoring as much as possible what came before Einstein. If the students are given a broad enough account of physics before Einstein, then the students might start protesting what they're being taught about physics from Einstein onwards is wrong. And of course they, i.e. the educators, don't want that, so they, the educators, omit as much as possible physics before Einstein. It's all to get an easy life. They want to teach to the physics to the students, and they don't want the students to start protesting that what they're being taught is wrong. So they the educators try to omit as much as possible, which would cause the physics students to question what they're being taught is being wrong. So this is the mainstream. They just keep sweeping certain things under the carpet.